Hi everyone. Thanks very much, Ben, for inviting me to this series. As Ben mentioned, I'm Dr. Rachel Doern, and I'm a senior lecturer in entrepreneurship at Goldsmiths, which is part of the University of London. And I'll just say a few words about my research. So I've spent many years looking at entrepreneurship in times of crisis. In particular, I tend to focus on topics relating to crisis management and resilience. So in the former case, how companies can detect their vulnerabilities in relation to crises, how they can prepare better for crises before they come, hopefully in advance, but to deal with some of the effects and to limit and localize those effects as they come. Also to think about the kinds of strategies and responses they can use to recover and to bring their businesses back to a state of normal and what they can learn from such. So that's crisis management. But I also look at resilience. And resilience really focuses on how companies, how individuals, how communities, how actors essentially can maintain a stable equilibrium during a time of difficulty. So it's all about focusing on what kinds of factors people can utilize in their existing environments to be resilient, and what kinds of factors or resources they can build on over time to be resilient. So those are my two areas of research as it relates to crises, crisis management and resilience. And also my research generally looks at business development and growth and challenges or barriers to growth. And more recently, I also look at entrepreneurial diversity, identities, and communities. And finally, my research tends to take a psychological and microsociological approach to understanding and explaining entrepreneurial phenomena. And I'll be drawing on some of these ideas over the next few weeks with Ben. So just to add perhaps that this session, thank you very much for joining us today, won't last longer than around 30 minutes. And although over the next few weeks, Ben and I will both be speaking quite fluidly around a number of different topics, that today Ben is on the hot seat. So I will be interviewing Ben about his experiences as a CEO, as a business owner during the crisis, to try to understand more about what it's been like for him and his team. So as an academic, I'm in a privileged position to speak to a lot of business owners about their experiences, but not everyone has that same vantage point. So we thought it would be really interesting and useful to come together and do that today. And I think Ben has a few points that he'd like to add about why we decided to come together and put this series together.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I feel like I'm in this position of like wonderful privilege, and it's one thing being a CEO of a 250 person business and so on and so forth, but more from like what we do. So that our job is to interact with businesses as they move, and as they move or refurbish their office, that tends to be part of a wider strategy, usually around growth, usually around development, usually around how they're trying to drive their business forward. So we work across industries, across sectors, across different business sizes, and it's just a real privilege to meet so many different CEOs, so many different business leaders that have so many different facets to what they do. And in speaking to them during this pandemic and now economic crisis, it's really struck home to me just how everyone's got to manage it differently. But also it struck home to me that a lot of business owners tend to sort of stay in their bubble. They don't like to perhaps recognize or say we're in a crisis because it makes them feel that they're in crisis. And I've just found that by broadening that, bursting that bubble, going outside of that, speaking to academics like you, Rachel, it's really just enlightened me and helped me to make good decisions for my business. And just would be a really wonderful opportunity to talk about that and share it with the broader business community, and hope that other business leaders and aspiring business leaders could get something from that as well.
Thank you. And from my perspective, it's very much the same. It's about bringing our two different worlds together. So I think often as academics, we talk about research and theory, and we speak to business owners, and we write up our papers, and that research doesn't often go beyond that, necessarily reach a wider audience. So my hope, like Ben's, is to bring together these two different worlds over the next few weeks to try to help everyone shine a light on a very volatile and uncertain time. So without further ado, I think we'll just jump right in. As I mentioned, Ben's on the hot seat today. So this session will take more of a traditional interview format, but I might jump in here and there when and where possible. And I would also encourage people that are joining us to take advantage of the Q&A function that's on the bottom of your screen. And we will try to get to some questions before the end of the 30 minutes as well. So that'll be another opportunity for us to answer any pressing questions and to interact more as a group. So the first question that I have for Ben today is,
Yeah, well, I mean, this business came out of the last crisis. I worked for a similar business to my own during the economic crisis, and that business was a wonderful business to work for that gave such great experience and exposure to its staff, but it was really crippled by what came in 2008, and sadly it didn't survive that period of time. And so I suppose in starting up ThirdWay, I had that sort of perhaps psychological damage that had been done to me about like how a crisis can really tear apart something that's good. So I think it's always been in our DNA that we've sort of thought about crisis or the potential for crisis. But when we started ThirdWay, you know, we were 0 people. It was me. We had 0 projects. We had 0 revenue. And in that 10-year journey, we've done the classic SME journey of now 250 people, now £100 million, delivering 1,000 projects a year. And the core values of the business and the desire of the business hasn't really changed during that time. The way we articulate it unquestionably has, but we set up ThirdWay because we did want to do things differently. We did see that there was an opportunity to always disrupt the norm, to ask questions of it and say, is it the way it should be done or the way we're just doing it? And ours was particularly about outcomes for people. It was how can we take your office, your environment that's there to just engage with staff and actually turn it into an asset as opposed to a function, to create something that really is a great space to be in and just fundamentally drives the ethos of a business. So ThirdWay's always been about that. It's always been in that space. And as I say, despite sort of growing fairly rapidly, that's always been the driver for the business, doing things different and giving a great service.
That's great. And you just touched on something really important, and we won't go into detail about it this week, but maybe over the next few weeks, this notion of prior crises actually impacting on actors, and how, in my research, for instance, on the London riots a number of years ago, how business owners who had been through a personal crisis or a professional one previously, let's say that their businesses had been burnt down or they had been affected negatively in some way, were actually in some ways better off. They had created this anticipation mindset. So again, we won't go into detail about it today, but we'll talk about it, I think, over the next few weeks, because as you suggest, that kind of prepared or laid some of the groundwork for you and your business, I think, as you move forward through this crisis and beyond. So my next question is,
it was going well. I mean, being a 10, nearly 11-year-old business now, there's always areas to improve upon, which I felt we were doing. There were always areas to grow as individuals. I'm talking about myself as well as a leader there. And also it was going well in the market. We were executing our strategies as we had drawn them out. We were getting better at that, better at knowing what good looked like, better at being more profitable, more efficient. And just really sort of arriving as a brand, arriving as a player within the market. So, you know, things were going well. And so, you know, it coming at that time, potentially, or it had the potential to derail some of those plans. But generally speaking, business, yeah, was feeling good, was looking good, and was an enjoyable place to be.
so when did you first notice things change as a result of the pandemic?
Yeah, I first noticed really early when my CFO came, I think, storming around the corner of the office here in early January and said, have you seen what's going on in China? And he started talking to me about the epidemic as it was then, and saying how worried we should be. And I've got to be honest, I didn't believe him. I was like, oh, well, I'm really pleased you're worried about it, but I think the WHO and the British government will have this. So I suppose me and the business were different from that perspective. The financial and operational side of the business saw it early and started to plan for it and have contingencies for it really early. I think for me, and say then like the broader business, the people of the business, you know, I don't think it really hit us until that week leading up to the fact that we were probably going to go into lockdown. You know, I think that's when all of a sudden, like, clients and the staff started to ask questions like, what actually is going on here? And you know, we had a scenario quite early on where a member of our staff had the symptoms of coronavirus, and very quickly we had to sort of shut the office, send everyone home, clean it. It was like, how do we manage that? What's the comms? Do we bring people back in? So very quickly it did impact the day-to-day operations. And then I would say post sort of lockdown, that's when it started to impact our work. You know, people were still pushing forward with projects and treating it as business as usual. So probably 2 to 3 weeks into the crisis when all of a sudden businesses just very naturally started to stop and think and reevaluate who they were. And particularly as it's evolved into now more of an economic crisis, that's created a whole different set of problems. So I would say it hit us as a strategical business quite early. It hit us on the human level, actually sort of very much as it was landing, and then hit us in the sort of economic and business plan and strategy as we went into it.
Okay, thank you. And so how would you
I think it's, I'd split it into three similar categories. It's like there's been an impact on the people, myself included, sort of what the psychological aspect of it is. Also sort of nervousness about traveling, nervousness about when you might come back to the office, nervousness about what the future looks like. So there's been a human impact that's been big. We've always prided ourselves on our culture here and caring for people. And it's been really pleasing to see how the people team, the talent team here really deployed and very early on to pick that up. I think in terms of like impact and effect on like a planning level, unquestionably it was time to like stop and to pause. But I think we did that really, really calmly. It wasn't sort of, oh no, there's a fire in the building, quick, let's put it out. It was a case of, okay, well, we've got product lines that we're offering. Are these the right product lines for the future? We've got some new product lines in the pipeline. Hey, is it time to actually accelerate them because the market's moving towards us? And also, we've got some things that actually may have been fit for a pre-COVID world. Are they going to be fit for the post-COVID world? Do we need to change them or not? So around the planning, it's really, really affected that. But I kind of feel in a really positive way that it's caused us as a business to stop and focus and really make sure we're aligned. And then on the project side, it's had a fairly major impact because what we do is very, very much connected to the wider economy. We're in the service industry. We're servants to companies that are affected by the economy. So just how we support them and advise them during this time has been very different.
So can you give me any other examples of how you've been affected in terms of specific projects or otherwise?
Yeah, I think in projects, people often will engage with us once they know that they need to move. They've got sort of a real clear idea of who they are as a business and who they're going to be or who they want to be in the next 24 to 36 months. So as they come to us, their briefing to us is quite well defined. They're pretty certain. Those foundations have sort of like slipped away. It's gone from being foundations of stone to foundations of sand for our clients. So we've actually had to go and support them before that and say, okay, it's not about necessarily who you believe you're going to be in the future or even now. It's about being fit for now, realizing that the next 6 months there's actually going to be a lot of change that you're going to need to make, a lot of agility that you're going to need to show. So how can we build a roadmap with you to get you back to your position of certainty where we can then like do our core business, our core projects. So we've really had to come in at sort of an earlier stage and work with our clients like never before. And we did do that through workplace strategy. But it's been actually really, really enjoyable to actually go in and again, really get to sort of know the nuts and bolts of a business and help them unpick what they need to do with their space for their people because of this crisis.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's I sort of guessed you might ask me a question like that. So if I'm being honest, sort of when I was brushing my teeth this morning, I was thinking if Rachel asked me a question like that, how honest can you be? When you open yourself up to an audience and you don't even know who that audience is or how big it's going to be. And I think for like the integrity of what we do, I guess I just want to be really honest about that. It's tough. There's no question it's tough. I've got like a great support team around me. I've got like a really great operational team, finance team, great business partners, just great team generally. Like to watch the way my team have engaged and they've been so passionate about the business and their clients has been amazing. But I can't hide from the fact or deny the fact that there is like a loneliness, an inherent loneliness that comes with being the decision maker, particularly in a period like this. And I've like reflected on the last 3 months, and it feels like 2 years worth of work that you're trying to squeeze into those 3 months, and the decisions that you need to make are equivalent to that. So to say it's not been like emotionally draining and psychologically tough would be a lie. To say there's not been moments where you question yourself and have a borderline or actually maybe even full-on crisis of confidence would be untrue as well. But in that, there's also come like great moments of clarity. There's come real moments where you realize what you're doing is right. You can look back to the past to see that actually the reason that your business has been so successful is because of the strategic decisions you've made and the way you've delivered. That's really, really reassuring. And I think also it puts a bit of fire in the belly as well. You know, it's like this is where you get to prove your worth. This is where you get to show that you do know your business, you do know your market, you can make decisions, you can be nimble, you can actually really action change. And so there's big adrenaline rushes that come with that as well. So I think I've just described myself as a seesaw, and that's probably the best way to look at it. You know, it's a roller coaster of emotions. There's bouncing around, there's up and down. But generally speaking, I don't think I'm going to look back on this period with any sort of regret. I think I'll probably look back on it with quite a bit of fondness for the drive and the fire that it put in the belly and the firm decisions that we made during the time.
Did you ever feel like giving up, or that it was just a bit too much, or there was too much uncertainty in front of you?
No, I wouldn't say that. I feel like unpicking the uncertainty is fun. Yeah, like that side of it. No, but I think the human side's the bit where when you sort of break it back and you see sort of the impact it has on you. You see that even though you're working from home, are you actually seeing your family anymore? Are you any more present? That unquestionably, has a bit of an impact. And I think also you can't hide from the fact that as a CEO, particularly of an SME, you've got to make decisions that impact people's lives. Decisions to put people on furlough, asking people to think about reductions in salary, and knowing that the market might change and that might be a longer term strategy that you have to have enabled. Knowing all of those things takes an emotional toll. And as I say, we're a business that's like hugely passionate about our people. We believe it's our people that really is our USP in the market. We've like pioneers really on like this cultural drive, certainly within our sector. So the human aspect, it definitely is what takes the biggest toll. We've worked really hard at the comms piece, like really communicating with the team, keeping the team engaged. And look, I wouldn't say that because we're a business to look to as an example. We've done it well because previously I've got it wrong when we've had crisis in the business before. I've actually been terrible at communicating it. So we've learned from those mistakes, and we've been really focused on keeping the team together once a week, as we do anyway, and having a team meeting. It's been interesting doing it as a broadcast instead of like a open forum, which has been interesting. But it's been also it's been quite cool because people must invite you into their homes. That you see them in their gardens with a lot of the staff, but also just in their living rooms and with their family. So that's been really enjoyable. But what we've ensured is for those on furlough, we've had really meaningful training programs. We've really kept them engaged and had them cross-pollinating, so people have worked together who aren't from the same departments or haven't traditionally worked together before. We've set up various sort of communication channels. We've had like running groups and all sorts to keep everyone physically engaged, everyone mentally engaged, but also to keep them technically engaged with their skill set. And just trying to be as clear as we can on communications of what the future looks like in what is a fast-changing world at the moment.
Thank you. Yeah, exactly. I think the human side is huge, and something that a lot of companies are dealing with at this time, and how best to communicate to staff and how best to be transparent, and also to empower people to perform, and at the same time to elicit ideas from them. And I think the companies that are doing well at this point in time are the ones who are being open and transparent and communicating frequently, because we all know that in times of uncertainty, the uncertainty arises because there is this gap, there is this misalignment between how much information we need and how much information we have access to. And next week we'll talk more about uncertainty and decision making in that context. So I think that's really important, and creating opportunities to connect with your staff, I think is really vital. So what would you would you
Yeah, I feel like a CEO or any business leader needs to have the ability to break the time space continuum. I think if you are trying to be right in the present, you're going to miss a trick for the future, and you need to remember the mistakes and the lessons from the past. So I think my concerns, like there are present concerns and there are future concerns, and it's about trying to like marry them together so the decisions you make now also cover off what you think will be there in the future. Like the present concerns, there was like labour the points. We talked about staff a lot, but it is about the staff. It is about them still feeling that they're valued, them still feeling that they're going to come back and be ready to come back and prepared to come back. Because although we will probably have some kind of hybrid solution going forward of more people working from home, inevitably people are going to have to come back into the working environment for periods of time and come back into an office environment and come back to see clients. So it's how we manage that and create security and comfort around that. But there is a broader concern of what the future looks like. You can't find a serious economist who's not talking about 2 years of recession. So it's what type of business do we need to be for the coming 2 years? What type of service lines do we need to push? What are the needs of our clients going to be? How do we meet those needs? How do we make sure we're best placed to meet those needs? And that's sort of where the concern's been. And the way we've tackled that is very early on, was day one in this crisis, we just split into different work streams. There's no point everyone worrying about everything. There's internal risk, there's external risk, and there's opportunity. And what we made sure was that we had designated leadership teams working on all of those 3 work streams, so they weren't being bogged down with worry. So we've really dealt well with the present internally and externally, but we've kept a huge eye and a huge energy towards what the future looks like. And I suppose I've helicoptered above, which is perhaps why there's the emotional seesaw, as you're jumping from internal risk to future opportunities and all the excitement that brings.
Okay, thank you. And I want to take a few questions now. So the first question is, how do you think the future will feel for employees?
That's a really good question. And it'd be interesting what your thoughts are on this, Rachel, because obviously you mentioned that some of your research is about the psychology of it all. I think that for us who have been in the workforce, we've been used to something and we're going to experience new. So it's almost the what is the new, and it's one of the reasons why we've called this the new abnormal, because actually a lot of the suggestions are abnormal. They're to grab headlines. They're not really based on any kind of scientific research or any real data collection. They're just people looking at a crystal ball. So I think people coming back into the workplace are going to naturally have some uncertainty and ask questions about what it's going to be like. And if it's 5% different to what they knew before, they're going to recognize a difference. Whereas someone coming in, it's all brand new. It is their normal. And I liken it back to us as a business. We set up in a recession. The beauty of setting up in a recession for us is we have no baggage. We didn't have to worry about clients going bust on us. We didn't have to worry about the supply chain not being able to deliver. All we had to focus on was growth. Whereas our peers at the time, or they would have regarded us as their peers, the established players, had so much baggage to deal with that it held them back. So I think those coming in will just take to it, see it as normal, whatever it is. And I would say to those coming back, it's actually learn from that lesson. It's like, yes, it will feel different, but don't carry it as baggage. See the opportunities to see what opportunities are going to present themselves to you and how you can grow through those opportunities.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have too much to add to that, to be honest, because I completely agree. And I think, as we'll discuss more next week when we look at uncertainty and how to make decisions in times of uncertainty, we look at scenario planning as a tool to help people like yourself navigate through this period. We'll look at how the different possible scenarios might have an impact, as you suggest, on the job roles and tasks and things that people did prior, and how this new normal or abnormal will necessitate a shift. And I think that is challenging for some people. We're all finding that we have to adapt to new ways of working. And certainly that's happening in my sector as well, in academia, as we shift to online teaching and research and otherwise. So I agree with you. I see it as an opportunity, but it doesn't mean that there won't be some resistance. And it doesn't mean that people won't need to be supported, and that additional training will need to be implemented as well. So I think, but it's more challenging for those staff perhaps who are returning and possibly entering into new roles, as opposed to staff entering to new roles in for the first time. And I think there are a lot of challenges around that as well, in relation to people accessing jobs over the next 2 years, and what kinds of skills will be attractive in the job market. That's something I think we can look at over time as well. So thank you for that question. Really, really interesting.
Can I just jump in on that?
Yes, please.
I would love to pick that up somewhere down the line. Is the skills piece. One of the things that we realize, we're presentation heavy as a business, and usually we're going and meeting clients and presenting something really tangible. It's the office environment, things you can touch. And we've had to transfer that obviously into a digital platform. And that actually brings in a totally different skill set, even a different human skill set. So it'd be really fascinating to sort of talk about that more in sort of later weeks, and like what skills are actually going to drive businesses forward, and what upskilling do we all need to take on board to do that in the months and years to come.
Yeah, and there's some really interesting research pieces that we could draw on as well in relation to the future of work and the so-called fourth industrial revolution, the knowledge sharing economy, and what kinds of skill sets people perceive. Asking, there have been studies, the World Economic Forum did a piece on it, looking at HR managers around the world at some of the biggest top global companies, asking them what kinds of skills they believe are important in the future in relation to problem solving, or managing collaborations, and otherwise having ICT knowledge, and so on and so forth. So I think we can come back to that. That's really important. So thank you for that question. And I want to turn now, just quickly before we finish, to another question, which is, Ben, do you believe that companies will have to
So this sort of goes back to my crystal ball comment. I think everyone at times like this likes an off-the-shelf answer, and there's not one. Maybe for some businesses the answer is yes, and maybe for some businesses the answer is no. They can halve their footprint and have a bigger remote workforce. I think what's really key for businesses to do is to take the opportunity to assess what's right for them. The office fundamentally is just a platform to enable the staff to do their job to the best of their ability. Now, for some businesses, that might mean they need more space. For other businesses, it might say, hey, we need to invest in more digital platforms. We need to invest in more training. We need to employ a different type of people, and we'll reduce our footprint. So I think that every business needs to take stock. I think the social distancing piece is an interesting one. And I have not become an expert in epidemiology in the last 3 months. Although the way I talk about it sometimes, I say to myself, are you sure you haven't? It's changing all the time. And that's why we need to keep advising our clients around the workplace that, look, the guideline's 2 meters now. What if it changes to 1 meter in 2 weeks' time? How much capital do you really want to spend on that? I think what's really important for businesses to do is like manage their cash flow, manage their expenditure, and have a team and have support and the right consultants, just driving them through the next 6 months. And unquestionably, within the next 6 months, we'll arrive at a position where we can all advise and we can all act with more certainty.
Thank you. So that's all we have time for. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. And just to flag up, our next session next week, we'll focus on decision-making and planning in times of uncertainty. And for that session, I'll be talking a little bit about why decision-making is difficult now and what kinds of things affect decision-making in times of uncertainty. Ben will discuss from his perspective as a CEO, as a business owner, how he's made decisions in this context. And he'll also give you some examples in relation to some of the businesses he's been speaking to and how they're making decisions. And I'll bring in some of my research as it relates to my own discussions with other businesses, small or otherwise. And we'll also give you some tips and tools in relation to scenario planning and how you can best utilize scenario planning. So how you can think about what's happening today in the current environment as it relates to the pandemic, as it relates to what's happening socially, economically, or otherwise, and how you can position your business within that, and what different possible scenarios are likely, and how you can respond accordingly. So next week, again, we'll talk about decision-making and planning in times of uncertainty. And then over the next several weeks, we'll pick up on some of the topics we've discussed today and some of the questions that have been raised, but we didn't necessarily get time to address. And we'll also talk about, as Ben mentioned, and as we discuss, well-being and leadership styles in times of uncertainty as well, because we think this is another issue that's pressing. So do join us next week for our discussion around decision-making and planning in times of uncertainty. And thank you so much again for joining us.
Thank you, everyone. Hope you enjoyed it.